A U.S. peace delegation made up of 19 Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Americans was recently denied entry into Israel and the Palestinian territories. Earlier today, representatives of the Muslim Public Affairs Council and the Fellowship of Reconciliation discussed their experiences at a news conference on Capitol Hill. Their comments are just under an hour.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming today. My name is Sarah Elton-Towie. I am a co-leader of this delegation, the Fellowship for Reconciliation delegation to Israel and Palestine. I'm also the communications director of the Muslim Public Affairs Council. I will briefly introduce to you members of this delegation who were detained and sent back when we went to try to visit Israel and the occupied territories. We left on Sunday and we have been to the Middle East and back. Okay, Dr. Joe Groves, right here, is a program coordinator of the Interfaith Peace Builders program with the Fellowship of Reconciliation, former professor of religious studies and director of Peace and Conflict Studies Department at Guilford College, and adjunct professor in the International Peace and Conflict Resolution program at American University. Dr. Julie Zalkind is the co-president of the Beth Chai Humanist Jews of Greater Washington, a 110-family Jewish congregation. She has a PhD in operations research from Johns Hopkins University. Carol Nickel is a Quaker, a grandmother, age 60 years old, and a practicing attorney in Knoxville, Tennessee. Delia Ibrahim is born and raised in Southern California, of Egyptian background, Bachelor in Science and Psychobiology from UCLA, Master's in Public Health with an emphasis on health promotion from the University of Southern California, will attend Georgetown Medical School this fall. Mona Ibrahim, Bachelor of Arts in Communication with a minor in Psychology from Stanford University. Dr. Joel Marant, Professor of Anthropology at Linfield College in McMinnville, Oregon, former Fulbright and International Research Exchange Board Scholar to Romania and Hungary, 30 years of field ethnography and archaeology, work on behalf of Yamhill County mediators and international conflict resolution and crisis prevention. Okay. We've got Ban Elwerdi, born and raised in California and a practicing attorney in Los Angeles, California. Okay, Robert Haddle, RNCEN, trauma and critical care registered nurse, rural health consultant and advocate, owner of Haddle House Youth Hostel, elder of First United Presbyterian Church, Las Vegas, New Mexico. Hashmat Ali, Egyptian-born American citizen with a bachelor's in psychology from UCLA, currently works for the American government, supervising children who are wards of the court and children who have special needs. And last but not least, Natalie Jones, Afro-Caribbean Russian Jewish descent, master's in speech pathology, veteran commission officer in the United States Coast Guard, currently data analyst in Silver Springs, Maryland. I'd like to introduce you to the group that the State of Israel has just deported, has called a group that is supporters of terrorism, a group that has just spent hours and hours in Israeli detention in substandard conditions, who never made it into the country. A group with an itinerary that included visiting for Muslim Americans for the first time. We're going to visit Jewish homes in West Jerusalem and eat Shabbat dinner. Jewish Americans for the first time are going to get to speak and interact with Palestinians. We are an interfaith, professional peace organization going to the territory to learn, study, gain access to our holy sites, and meet with all members of the region in order to learn more about this conflict. We feel very strongly that the United States government, our government, has let us down despite going through as many channels as we possibly could before the trip to secure our safety before we left, including acquiring letters from members of Congress, speaking to the State Department, speaking to the Israel desk at the State Department, informing the Israeli embassy of our itinerary before we left. We were rejected and we were put in cells with criminals and deported to locations like Newark, New Jersey, where nobody has ever been. I will leave the details to other members of the delegation. The first person I'd like to introduce, once again, is Dr. Joe Groves, co-leader of the delegation.
I find this to be a very sad and troubling day, personally, and I think for anyone concerned about peace efforts in the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. I'm particularly sad that the Fellowship of Reconciliation delegation, which was co-sponsored by Muslim Public Affairs Council, was deported yesterday from Israel. The Fellowship of Reconciliation is the oldest pacifist organization in the United States, formed in 1914. During World War II, we worked closely with the German Fellowship of Reconciliation, which was active in smuggling Jews out of Germany to keep them from concentration camps, and the U.S. branch did their best to help Jews gain entry into the United States despite the limited immigration policies by the United States. The fellowship began its Middle East work in 1975. We have been doing these delegations to the Middle East now for 27 years, and this is the first time we have ever been denied entry to Israel and Palestine. We had hoped to meet with both Palestinians and Israelis to talk about the prospects for peace, to learn from them what the possibilities were. We have been denied even the opportunity to meet with the Israeli chapter of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, headed by Amos Gewirtz, and also with Rabbi Jeremy Milgram, who is part of the Israeli chapter of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. We're not even allowed to meet with our fellow FOR peace pacifist within Israel itself. I think there's a real question for me why we were turned away and how our work can be so misrepresented by Israel. I want to read just a couple of statements here. One, an excerpt from a letter from Dianne Feinstein that we took with us describing our work in FOR's work in the Middle East, and then a statement by Representative Sam Farr that he just released today. Dianne Feinstein said that I believe that these kinds of people-to-people interfaith efforts at mutual understanding have an important role to play in moving the Middle East beyond hatred and violence. I hope that you will extend to this delegation all courtesies and considerations while they are in your country. I appreciate your assistance. The statement by Congressman Sam Farr, Democrat of California. I was deeply disappointed to learn that the Interfaith Peace Builders Fellowship of Reconciliation has been denied entry to Israel. In view of the escalation of violence in the Middle East over the last year and a half, this is certainly an unfortunate turn of events. The Fellowship of Reconciliation has played a vital role in urging us to look beyond our immediate surroundings and strive for world peace. To that end, it has built coalitions, educated the public, and reached across sectarian divides to seminal people of the common goals that unite them. I hope that the Israeli government will reconsider its decision. I find it very troubling that we are being depicted as people who do not support peace, who are not working in the interest of peace in this conflict. I think that that we are at a crucial point, and I think it's worth asking what's changed. Why were we rejected when for 27 years we've been allowed to go in? Why were we rejected when we have sent 4 delegations in the last 18 months with no question from the state of Israel, and we were allowed to enter and do our mission? I think that 2 things in particular have changed in regard to this situation. First, with this delegation, we had our most successful effort in reaching out to the American Muslim community and meeting with Muslims of conscience who are very concerned about peace in the region, and we sent the most representative interfaith delegation possible that we have ever done to this area. We were 19 people, 9 Muslims, 5 American Jews, 6 people of other faiths, and we were denied. The message that we take away from this is that Israel does not want us as an interfaith peace organization to be working with Muslims who care about peace. We feel that this deprives us of the ability to bring people together around peace efforts in Israel, in the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. I think that the second thing that has changed is the speech that President Bush made about a week before we left. President Bush's speech has basically given Israel a complete green light to do what they want to do, both in the occupied territories and with U.S. citizens who wish to enter Israel and work for peace. In the airport, the Consul General of the U.S. Embassy was there, Ed McKeon. He was with us in the airport for several hours, talking with the Ministry of the Interior. In the airport, he said that it was very important for us to get into the country. He examined our itinerary, said that we should be allowed to do this, that it would help efforts at peace, and the Israeli government simply did not listen to him. I think the Israeli government feels no obligation to listen to even U.S. officials who want to get U.S. citizens into the country. This is a very troubling turn of events. At the same time, we feel that the State Department has not supported us in our efforts to work for peace in the region. Some of the other speakers will give specifics about that, but we are very troubled that on the whole, the State Department is not stepping up for American citizens and helping us work for peace in the area. So I thank you for being here and at this press conference, and look forward to talking with you more about this. Thank you.
Before I bring up Heshmet Ali, I want to just bring up 2 other points. The first is that we were told by Israeli security that we were not let in because for our safety. While we were waiting for our passports to be looked through, hundreds of people wearing buttons that express complete solidarity with Israel were let through. Also, the 2 Israeli citizens who were with us on the delegation were let through, and I find it hard to believe that the state of Israel is more concerned about our welfare than theirs. The second thing is I'd like to give you some background on the Minister of the Interior who brought down this decision. This is someone who is quoted as saying about the Palestinians, "We are not dealing with people, we are dealing with beef." This is somebody who, and we passed out the article, I can pass out the article, wrote a letter to President Clinton wrote a letter to President Clinton during his presidency asking him to immediately recall Ambassador Martin Indyk back to the United States because Indyk had made statements indicating that Jews should share Jerusalem with Arabs and Muslims. And I think this is an important background to understand the type of extremism we are now dealing with in the Israeli government, and that has now been unfortunately supported by our own. And Americans really need to understand and get involved and watch and monitor and stand witness to what is going on now inside Israel and to the Palestinians. With that, I will introduce Heshmet Ali.
Good morning. Tomorrow is the 4th of July, and I'd like to remind all Americans of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, which guarantees certain inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, no taxation without representation, and freedom of religion being among these rights, as well as no discrimination based on ethnicity and color of skin. I'm reminded of a speech that Woodrow Wilson gave on July 4th, 1914. He said, I quote, "I would be ashamed of this flag if it ever did anything outside America that we would not permit it to do inside of America," end quote. This brings me to the topic at hand, taxation. We as Americans, Arab, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Israeli Americans who pay taxes, all of us who want peace and security for everyone are being taxed, yet we are not being represented in our government's foreign policy. Our foreign policy includes giving billions and billions of tax dollars and billions of tax dollars worth of military equipment and military training to the state of Israel. Just as we can conscientiously object to not serving in the military, I believe we should be allowed to conscientiously object to having to pay the portion of our taxes that are used to support the occupation of people indigenous to their land. When it comes to the topic of freedom of religion, Israel detained and deported this peace builders delegation, which merely wanted to communicate with Jewish Israelis and Christian and Muslim Palestinians so as to gain an understanding of the people in the Holy Land directly according to their views, and so that we as an interfaith group could get to know all the peoples involved in the conflict. The purpose of this group was to study ways in which the peoples involved could somehow reconcile their minute differences by recognizing the enormous similarity inherent within all humanity and all religious tradition. Perhaps people on all sides could learn from the ethnically and religiously diverse peace group that we are, and perhaps seeds of peace could be planted in the Holy Land that could grow into trees of life, love, and liberty. This group has the best of intentions and was not interested in breaking any laws. But the Israeli government's policy has shown that the Israeli government is not interested in peace. It is not tolerant of Muslims and Arabs, and it is not tolerant of Christians and Jews of various ethnicities that happen to be tolerant of Muslims and Arabs. Israel is not tolerant of peace. Israel will fail in its attempt to bar people of non-Jewish religions from visiting internationally recognized holy sites. Israel will fail in its attempt to keep Jews, Christians, and Muslims from enjoining one another to do good works as the Quran and the Bible have commanded. And Israel will fail in its attempt to forbid peace. In the Beatitudes of the Bible, God says that blessed are the peacemakers. The Israeli Ministry of the Interior has said that we were not allowed in because they don't want to allow terror into their country. Let us ask ourselves why an interfaith group wanting to build peace is terrifying to Israel. And how can Israel convict this group or any of its members of being terrorists? And how can it convict a whole population of Palestinians of being terrorists? And how can Israel convict anybody without due process and evidence of being terrorists? What is left but for the Israeli government to continue to collectively punish every Palestinian until they are all dead or incarcerated? Will Americans for Peace in the Middle East sit comfortably at home this 4th of July and ignore all the inalienable human rights violations that are occurring in Israel? Let's not wait until there is a genocide before we start to act. Are we waiting for another human catastrophe before we start to act? I say enough is enough, and let's learn from never again and put never again into action. I demand entry into Jerusalem, a golden site deemed holy to over 1.5 billion Muslims. Billions of Christians should not be barred from visiting the land where Jesus Christ once walked and prostrated. And Jews who are related to Holocaust survivors should not be deported from the Jewish state of Israel for having friends who are Christians, Muslims, or Arabs. Israel must be held accountable for violating this group and for its atrocities against the peaceful. And we as Americans should not have to pay the percentage of our taxes that go to any sovereign country which violates human rights and prevents multi-ethnic and interfaith peoples from visiting their holy sites in peace. Israel even prevents Israelis from building peace, such as the 2 Israeli Americans that were with us that were forced to separate from the group and enter Israel while we were forced to be deported. We should only be taxed for the things that represent our interests: freedom of religion, taxation with representation, and liberty. I propose that Jerusalem be made an internationally sovereign city, and that any crimes committed in Jerusalem be tried in an international court. And I propose that the United States and Israel support an international peacekeeping force in Jerusalem and the Palestinian lands until they can mobilize a truly democratic system that liberates them from the brutal Israeli occupation and prevents terrorism from threatening the lives of Israelis. Killing one innocent human is like killing all of humanity, and this is according to the Jewish and Muslim scriptures. I see occupation and terrorism as violent twins that tower over the Holy Land. The global struggle for peace, or the global jihad for peace, must topple the occupation and terrorism. The Quran states that oppression is worse than death, so let's end oppression on all sides. And thank you for hearing me today. Peace.
Thank you very much, Heshmet. I'd like now to introduce Dr. Julie Zalkind, who is the co-president of the Beth Chai Humanist Jews of Greater Washington, 110 family Jewish congregation. Julie.
Hi. All right, come up with me. Hello, I am Julie Zalkind, co-president of Beth Chai, a Jewish congregation of 110 households here in Washington, D.C. This is my rabbi, Arthur Blecker, who's come to support me, and this is Walter Scott. And they are here in some sense as proxies for my 2 colleagues, Rain Zohav, the principal of our school, who is a dual Israeli-American citizen, and her son Shai, who were both forced to enter Israel at the same time that we were forced to leave. Rabbi Blecker will speak in a couple of minutes, and Walters is here as a sort of support. Rain was the first person who introduced me to FOR in this delegation. I have never been to Israel before, but I've always thought of it as being there for me, just as I have always both appreciated and taken for granted my United States citizenship. Neither the U.S. nor Israel is perfect, and I've always thought that it was my duty to work for change and improvement in both. As we say in Hebrew, we have a duty to tikkun olam, or repair of the world. In the U.S., I am an active participant in our democracy, reading, traveling, and talking to people, and then taking action by working for candidates, writing letters, and participating in occasional peaceful demonstrations. I've also worked for our government as a division director in the Department of Energy. It was in this spirit that I decided to visit Israel and the West Bank with the Fellowship of Reconciliation. I've been troubled by reports of how mean-spirited the Israelis were in their treatment of the Palestinians. This seems so out of tune with what I know of intrinsic Jewish values. And especially since 9/11, I've wanted to know my Muslim American brothers and sisters better. This trip seemed like a way to accomplish both goals. I believe that all participants went in peace, although some of our personal goals differed from each other. I was stunned, then saddened and angered to be denied entry to Israel. And I want to show you all my denied entry stamp. I'm a Jewish American person, and here it says denied entry at Ben Gurion Airport. I demand, as a Jewish American who is related to victims of the Holocaust, to be allowed entry into Israel, regardless of whether or not I associate with Muslims and Arabs. Thank you, and let me introduce Rabbi Blecker.
I'm Rabbi Arthur Blecker. I was ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America of the Conservative Movement in 1975. I have known members of FOR, known of the work of FOR for nearly 30 years, and I know them to be good and decent people. I have spent most of my life in the study of Bible and the other sacred literature of my people. I have deeply held beliefs in right and wrong. I learned yesterday that members of my congregation were denied entry to Israel. They were there motivated by the pursuit of knowledge and understanding. What they did was the right thing. That they were denied entry, that they were intimidated, that they were humiliated was the wrong thing. I am angry and saddened that the guardians to the gates of my ancestral homeland have behaved in this fashion. What they did was the wrong thing.
Thank you very much. Our last speaker is going to be Robert Haddle, and he is a nurse here in the United States. He's got a very powerful presentation of our conditions in detention.
I'm a registered nurse in the state of New Mexico. With my friends and colleagues in this group, we were first detained without an opportunity to sit down or rest, with limited access to water in the bathroom, only being escorted. Finally, at 11 o'clock at night, after our consulate general assured us that we would be taken to a place that we could rest, we were taken onto a bus and entered into a detention cell. I'm a registered nurse who's worked for the state of New Mexico in the state prison, where I've had to answer to the quality of care and by a state legislative mandate called the Decree for the Quality of Care of Taking Care of Inmates. The conditions that we were placed in were substandard and subhuman. We were both segregated by sex as a group. We were placed in rooms where the lights were never turned out. The males were placed in a room. There were 9 males of us. There were already 6 males in the room. There were only 6 beds. We were given blankets to sleep on a concrete linoleum floor. The bathroom facilities were terribly dirty. We had no toilet paper. The other people that were in the facility had been brought up for criminal charges, but not told why they were being detained. One gentleman was actively psychotic and confused. We had to share that room with him. The room that the females had to share was also, the bathroom was shared by the male security guards. They were not given privacy. There was no opportunity. The food that we were given, we were told would be airline food. They were sandwiches in a plastic bag. Fluid was only available from the sink that was dirty. If these were the conditions that I practiced in as a nurse and provided to other prisoners in the state of New Mexico, I could have been sued. My own government knowingly said that we were going to the Hilton, and these were the conditions we were placed in. My passport too was stamped that I was denied access to the state of Israel. I was placed in these conditions, as well as the other members of my delegation, I think because I associate with fellow Muslim Americans, Christian Americans, and Jewish Americans. Thank you. I have pictures. This is the only way that the males and females could communicate, or through limited access.
I'll help you hold them.
Yeah. This is one of the things that is mandated, that when you're incarcerated, that you have access to be able to tell the time of day. There were no clocks in the room. There was no way to tell in these bunkers. Each of the windows were barred with metal doors and locks. There was no fresh air entering into the room. We were told in Hebrew that says exit. There was no way to open that window. These are the bathroom conditions in the female side. We had to share food and access through food through a door that was broken. Again, communicating. When we took pictures, we did still have our cameras. When we took pictures, we were threatened that our cameras were going to be confiscated. I think as an American citizen who wants to join in peace and an understanding of what's going on in Israel, and my other fellow colleagues were terribly mistreated and also jeopardized, with the full awareness of the Consulate General of the Embassy in Israel. This is not the Hilton. It's not even a funny joke.
Thank you, Robert. I'd like to close. I just want to emphasize that we were placed in these conditions with the full knowledge of the United States, of our Consul General, who we had been in contact with extensively before we left on our trip. We demand answers. We demand the right to the Holy Land. We demand the right for Christians, Jews, and Muslims to travel together in peace to the Holy Land. And we expect our government, which gives such support in every way to the state of Israel, to at least protect its citizens who go in peace to the state of Israel. We have been called terrorists in the press, and this has to stop. Now, after this press conference, a few of us will go to the State Department and have meetings. We will go to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and have meetings. We will go to the House Foreign Relations Committee and have meetings. We will demand hearings on what has happened, not only to our delegation, but several delegations now. And we will not stop until we get answers from our government as to why Americans are repeatedly being treated this way by the state of Israel. Thank you very much. Please stay tuned. If anybody has any questions, we have several articulate members here who have not spoken but also have experiences, and any of us who spoke would also be happy to take questions. Thank you. Who has a question? Why can't I see? Oh, yes. Could you identify yourself, please?
I'm sorry?
Can you identify yourself, please?
Brad Ryan with CNN.
Uh-huh.
Judging by the letters you have here from Dianne Feinstein and others, it looks like you were expecting some trouble to get in before you even left. Is that right?
Judging by the letters we got from Feinstein, it looks like we're... The reason we were... The question is, judging from the letter we got from Dianne Feinstein and other senators, it looks like we were expecting trouble upon going in. Somebody like to... I mean, I can... Yes.
I'll do it.
Okay.
We were concerned about being able to get in because the group from the American Muslims for Jerusalem was turned away about a week earlier. And we did what we could to prepare for possible problems or questions. But we also felt that since the Fellowship of Reconciliation had sent several delegations, 4 delegations in the last 18 months, and since we had been doing this type of delegation work for 27 years, that we would be admitted and that we should be admitted. So although we tried to prepare for problems, we certainly were expecting to be admitted and were surprised when we were denied.
Since you've been to the region and you know the area, what's your gut instinct about whatever real reason might be that you were denied access? I could guess that the Israeli government really didn't want you in the occupied territories because if any of you get killed there, the Palestinians can use it as a propaganda tool, and which is probably what they're trying to avoid.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
First of all, we had an itinerary that the State Department had received and probably the Israeli government was well aware of, and they had it at the airport. And what the Consulate General said to us during the evening, we got to the airport at 4 o'clock. At 11 o'clock that night, we were told we still might be let in conditionally if we would meet with the Israeli government the next day and adjust our itinerary. We said we are glad to do that. I felt, my name is Carol Nickel, by the way, I felt that we might be spending 2 weeks in Jerusalem. I knew that we might not be able to go through our whole itinerary. That was okay because we wanted to meet with Israeli peace groups. We wanted to meet with the Women in Black. We wanted to meet with the other Israelis who are working for a nonviolent resolution to this horrible situation. The Israeli government did not want us to do that. They prevented us from meeting with Israelis who are working for a nonviolent resolution. They prevented our peacemaking group from meeting with other peacemakers, including in Jerusalem, the Israelis. So, you know, I think we were willing to adjust our itinerary. We were never given an opportunity to do that, and we were led on. We were led on because when we were put in detention at the airport, we were told that we might get a phone call from the Ministry of the Interior, the Israeli Ministry of the Interior, and he would let us meet with him the next day and adjust our itinerary. We never got that phone call. And a phone rang. I was in the women's room. And we were right there where the guard's station was. And the phone rang, and somebody said, maybe that's the Minister of Interior calling sometime in the middle of the night. Well, of course it wasn't. He never called, and it's my understanding that we couldn't get a hold of the Consulate General the next morning. Also, our cell phones were not working. They would not work, but he could have called right there where we were to the guard. We never got an opportunity to stay in Jerusalem to meet with Israeli peace groups. The Israeli government doesn't want peace. The Israeli government is preventing peace groups, American peace groups, from meeting with Israeli peace groups to work out a nonviolent resolution to this horrible situation. In the meantime, the killing goes on, the killing escalates, and I'm wondering too, what does the Israeli government have to hide? Now they're not letting people in. It may be too late once we have hearings. Our government needs to act now, immediately. We know that our government has the influence of the Israeli government. If our government says let Americans in, the Israeli government will have to let Americans in. Look at the financial situation. Look at the money flowing into Israel. And our government let us down too.
What day did this happen?
What day did I get my days confused? But we got there July 1st. And on July 1st, we landed in Ben Gurion Airport, and then we were placed in detention that night, you know, with the time change. It was 4 o'clock Israeli time when we landed. We were kept in the airport under custody. We were not allowed to go to the bathroom without an officer accompanying us to the door of the bathroom. We were not allowed to meet as a group and try to figure out what are we going to do about this horrible situation. Rain, who is a Jewish American citizen and has dual citizenship, she and her 25-year-old son were ordered to leave us. They took them somewhere else. We didn't know where they'd gone. They said they have to stay in Israel. When we went to get our baggage, we were ordered to get our baggage from the baggage claim area so they could go through everything, which they did. And we saw Rain there, and one of the other women in the group went up to Rain to hug her, and an officer was standing there and said, "Don't touch her." So I threw her a kiss. It was like they were watching us, they were with us every move. Natalie, after her bags were gone through, she wanted to come over and sit by me so at least we could console each other. They ordered her to another area. They were separating us. We were under custody, and you know, we couldn't leave, and we couldn't even talk as a group.
We got back, well, we were all put on random flights, essentially, back to the United States. They came in about a half an hour before we were supposed to leave, herded us on a bus, put us on random flights. They told us, you have to go back to where you came from. Other people had other plans. There was no movement on our tickets. I flew to Newark, New Jersey. I've never been to Newark, New Jersey. We had to rent a car at our expense to drive here to Washington, D.C. We got back at 2 in the morning. Anyway, any more? Yesterday. Last night. This morning. Yeah.
What sort of reaction do you think the American government would have had if this would have happened in a country like Libya, say, or Iraq, or...
If the government of Iraq had detained American citizens with substandard food and water and had treated us like common criminals and put us in cells with other detainees, I think we can all answer that question for ourselves. Again, I want to emphasize that we gave the U.S. government every piece of information on this trip we could possibly have given them. We met with members of the State Department. We met with the embassies. We went through all of the hoops. We got letters from members of Congress, and we basically were not given the full information, and we were not helped to the full extent that we are convinced we could have been helped by the Consul General in the airport. Another point I'd like to bring in about the detentions and about the, I'll let someone else ask a question. Go ahead, sorry. Yeah. Yes, please.
I'm Dr. Joel Morant, professor of anthropology at Linfield College in Oregon. In response to your question, sir, I'm a past Fulbright scholar, and I took that responsibility very seriously because the American people were paying for me to go to another country in Eastern Europe, that is Romania. And to Romania. And I did that 3 times, and this was during the worst period of communist repression under the Ceausescu government. I entered 3 times. I was never denied entry. And that gave me the opportunity to go to a country that was seen as a representative of an evil empire, learn about conditions there, come back, and as my responsibility as a representative of the American people and the scholarly community to report what I found. That happened 3 times in a communist nation. This was my first trip as a member of a peace-building community, a congregation, a group, a delegation to go to a democracy, to one of our nation's friends. And I was, in my first visit, denied that opportunity along with my colleagues. I think that says something is very seriously wrong about our nature of who we see as friends, who we see as enemies, and about the responsibilities of the government to provide information to the American people. I'm coming away from this disillusioned, but not discouraged, because having joined here with people who are American citizens from different backgrounds, I can tell you that the strength of the American will to gather information, to gain access to the truth, is far stronger than any kind of structural resistance that the U.S. government or the Israeli government can provide. Thank you.
Yes.
From Yeshiva University, the commentator.
Which university?
Yeshiva University.
Yeshiva University.
So I understand that you had an agenda to go there, a political agenda to work with fellow people that you were working with in order to get peace or whatever, but many of you were saying that Christians and Jews and Muslims weren't allowed to go to holy sites. So I just wanted to ask if what you're saying is that Israel is not allowing Jews and Christians and Muslims to visit their holy sites.
Yes, we are saying that we were not, yes.
The land of Israel are closed off to Christians and Muslims and some Jewish Americans.
We are Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and we were denied access to our holy sites.
You said that Jews, Christians, and Muslims in general weren't being allowed access to holy sites, like the church's
I'll repeat,
culture.
we are Jews, Christians, and Muslims. We were denied access to our holy sites.
And
yes?
you went there to visit holy sites.
Michael Brown with Middle East International. What do you hope to accomplish with your meeting with the State Department? You said today that's
yes,
taking place?
after this press conference. Well, we have some follow-up work to do because, like I said, we met with the State Department. Of course, yes. We're going to talk about our conditions, and we need to put it colloquially, up the ante. This is the second group in 2 weeks that have been deported and treated this way. We are going to call for hearings. We're going to call for an investigation, and we need guarantees from our government that when people have legitimate peacemaking purposes to go into Israel, to visit holy sites, that we should be allowed access.
We understand that the State Department has decided not to issue any kind of protest to Israel at this point about our departure. And we want to specifically raise that with the State Department, particularly with our treatment in detention and particularly with what we feel were very misleading statements by the Consul General about what was going to happen with us last night. I was talking very direct, face to face with the Consul General. He said that we would be given rooms for the night, and then a decision would be made overnight. The captain of the Israeli police who were providing us with security came up and said, and sort of corrected him and said, we are going to give you 2 bunk rooms, one for men and one for women, with bunk beds. And the Consul General said, yes, we call it the Hilton. And they both sort of chuckled. For the Consul General to mislead us and to not tell us that we were going to detention cells, which Robert described very well, is, I think, a serious issue for the safety of U.S. citizens going into Israel. And we plan on raising this directly with the State Department and trying to get them to explain why they did not work in our interest and why they did not even tell us that we were going to detention cells when they knew that that's what was going to happen.
Yes.
Kept in the detention.
Can you identify yourself?
Adnan Abdurrahman of CARE.
Yeah.
How many hours was your group kept in the detention cells?
How many hours was our group in detention cells? I lost count because we couldn't see daylight. What was it? Yeah.
We were in the airport from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. We were in the detention cells from 11 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. Yesterday morning.
And I'd like to add that we were told that we would be put on a plane at 5 a.m. So, from 5 a.m. on, or before 5 a.m., we were expecting to be taken out. And then you found out from Joe when we finally were allowed to leave.
Any more questions? Okay, if there are no more questions, we're all available for interviews after this. And yes?
So, as a group, though, do you recognize the right of Israel to at least exist in a two-state solution? That, like she said, that the land of Israel is the home of
Speaking for the group, we all recognize the right of Israel to exist. Thank you very much. Any questions after this, please ask individuals. We appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Have a happy 4th of July.